Mark Rogers, TV talking USC football with the Trojans coming off an impressive showing against Stanford at the Coliseum. We bring in Chris Swanson. He's on the Rivals Network at Trojan Sports. All right, Chris, as we talked about before we started to record, this effort was extremely impressive considering Stanford was coming off a demolition. It was Rice, but still, we know Stanford's very physical football team on both sides of the ball. And that's where USC really surprised me in this game was, let's start with the offensive line, because that was the big question mark, and the offensive line played extremely well.
Yeah, they proved a lot in this game, honestly. I think there were a lot of question marks coming in to this game about USC's offensive line. Is Toa Lopendon really a left tackle? Can they replace Damian Mama, Zach Banner, and Chad Wheeler effectively? They played Stanford, a team that I expect to probably have the best defensive front, defense in general, that they're going to face all season, and maybe even including the playoffs if they get there. I mean, Stanford has that kind of defense. They have a top level defense, and USC pushed them around up front, ran the ball all over them, gave Sam Darnold time. Sam Darnold had a big game despite the fact that Stanford's secondary is pretty darn good as well. One of the better secondaries, I think, in college football. So, yeah, I think the offense had a huge performance, and I think we all knew that, USC had some running backs. We all knew about Sam Darnold. We all expected that they could have some pretty good receivers, even though, it was a question mark. It's USC. But, yeah, their offensive line proved a lot because they beat up on Stanford, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, Chris, we'll stay on the offensive side of the game plan against Stanford. And Sam Darnold, much criticism after the Western Michigan showing, despite scoring, I believe, 49 points in that game. He threw a couple interceptions, did in this game as well. Your assessment of Darnold's performance against what you just mentioned, one of the best secondaries expected here in 2017 in Stanford.
Yeah, I think he had a great performance. I know they threw a couple picks, so people will look at that. The numbers probably weren't, the Josh Rosen versus Texas A&M numbers or anything like that, but he's playing against one of the best secondaries in the country. I thought it was an amazing matchup to watch, a very high-level matchup where it seemed like, just every time he made a mistake, Stanford was going to make him pay, but he didn't make very many mistakes at all. I thought he had a great performance. There were turnovers, yes, but he's playing against one of the best secondaries in the country, and I thought he kind of tore him up a little bit. I thought it was a very Heisman-worthy performance, in my opinion.
Yeah, the ball didn't hit the ground much at 21 of 26 and 316 yards, despite the 2 interceptions, but 5 incompletions, including the interceptions. So 3 incompletions out of Sam Darnold against a Stanford defense that came in pretty highly acclaimed, especially the back four. Ronald Jones, a given. Stephen Carr, one of the best recruits in the country, comes in. He had a big game in week 1. Now against a really acclaimed defense, he tears him to shreds. So Stephen Carr and Ronald Jones now provide quite the running threat.
Yeah, I think that everyone knew that USC could have a good backfield coming into the year because of Ronald Jones. Stephen Carr looks like a really special freshman, one of those once every decade or so type freshmen. USC has one of the best backfields in the entire country now. He's special. Rojo's special, obviously. The guys beneath him are good enough that, for your 3rd and 4th running backs, USC's in a really, really good position. I think that this emergence of Stephen Carr has given USC really a new weapon and has increased the value of their backfield. And, they have a very dangerous backfield. I think if you look at that offense now, it's hard to stop them from throwing the ball, and you pretty much have to sell out to stop the run as well. I'm not sure how you stop USC's offense besides just hoping that something bad happens.
Mark Rogers TV on the line with Chris Swanson from Trojan Sports on the Rivals platform for USC Athletics. Deonte Burnett, we know what he did in the Rose Bowl. The thought process was, okay, does he elevate to that level on a game-to-game basis as an elite receiver, or does he drop back to the 45 or 50 catch guy that we would expect? It seems as though he's turning in some big ball games. The other question, Chris, being that the secondary receivers, even though they're highly touted, and in Stephen Mitchell's case, a guy that's been around campus for quite a while, didn't see a whole lot against Western Michigan. Darnold didn't necessarily trust them to make plays and was constantly looking at Burnett. So your thoughts about the complementary guys and also Burnett?
I thought that they all stepped up big against Stanford. I thought they all had a huge game. I was the guy coming into the year that when everybody was talking about Deonte Burnett, I expected big things out of him, but I point to the fact that I don't think he's an NFL type receiver. He's putting up such big numbers that I don't really know what to say. I still don't feel like he's that physical kind of receiver, but he's made me look very wrong. He's been very impressive. Steven Mitchell, I thought, could potentially struggle on the outside. I didn't think that was his natural position. Against Stanford, he had a great game, and he was incredible too. And I think that so far that these receivers have looked pretty darn good, especially in this game. The first game was a little bit tougher for them, but against such a good secondary. And I think Sam Darnold, you mentioned the trust, maybe not being there in that first game. I think that he showed against Stanford. He had a lot of trust in his receivers. He put the ball in places where he just expected them to be there and make plays, and they did for him. And I think that that's a huge sign for USC fans going forward, because that was the question mark on this offense. Looks like USC might have, one of the better receiving cores in the Pac-12, or just be totally fine, at least at that position.
Before we move on to the defense, one number really stands out in looking at the USC offensive performance against Stanford, against what should be a really good defense. The number one, it shows up in the box score 3 times. 1 sack, which is the same as the tackle for loss, and 1 pass defensed. That's all Stanford did in the backfield, in USC's backfield. So really no plays behind the line of scrimmage aside from the 1 sack is pretty amazing against Stanford on defense to churn out an entire college football game. Usually you see, even if you're successful offensively, you see 5, 6, 7 plays behind the line of scrimmage, but really nothing there for Stanford is pretty amazing right there. Looking at the USC defense, yeah, they gave up the one big play to Bryce Love, 75 yards on the ground, but Keller Chris barely 50% through the air, so he had his issues against the USC defense. So your evaluation of the Trojans on that side of the ball?
I thought they looked great. I thought the defense looked like a national title contending defense. You mentioned the one big play. There were a couple passing plays where, it looked like they were giving up big yards or there were penalties or whatever. But I thought they stepped up. I thought they controlled Stanford's offense. Not a lot of teams do that, just even through the last decade. I thought they did enough to allow, a monster of an offense to really take over the game and control Stanford. And I was impressed. I thought that there was potential after watching that Western Michigan game that Stanford, could kind of beat them up front on both sides of the ball. And I kind of expected Stanford to be able to run all over their defensive line and their defensive front. Didn't happen. And USC really stepped up and knocked it out of the park. And I'm as impressed with the defense right now as I am with the offense. They probably don't have, the Sam Darnold type big name, but that back 7, that back 8, whatever it is really, really impressive. And the defensive line has come through and stepped up, and they're looking pretty good. I mean, they had that performance against Stanford. You can't question them anymore either. I think they could have one of the better defenses in college football. I think they might have the best defense in the Pac-12 this year.
We've got Chris Swanson on the line from Trojan Sports. Please join him there for the best in USC football coverage, with the Trojans coming off a huge win over Stanford and another brand name game, we'll call it, against Texas, as we look back to 11 years and the Vince Young National Championship game against a favored USC team in the big upset at the Rose Bowl to win it and end the USC dynasty in certain respects. This Texas team, much different, coming off sure, San Jose State, they win that game 56-0. But if you look back to the opener, Maryland comes in, lowly regarded, probably one of the 3 or 4 worst teams in the Big Ten, expected, and then they score 51 against Texas. So, Chris, you got a Texas team. They've recruited well in the recruiting rankings, so there's talent on the roster. But, man, they just continue to be in disarray, at least against decent opponents. We can't gather a whole lot from last week, although they certainly put the foot down on San Jose State. So here comes Texas, and what can possibly be expected this week?
Yeah, I think that it's Texas, but it's not Texas. It's not the Texas that everybody, thinks about when they think of college football history. I think that USC is getting Texas at the right time. I think this is going to be like one of those games where, Notre Dame is down and USC handles them, or another big name program is down and gets handled. I just think USC is on a completely different level than Texas right now, in a completely different universe even. They gave up 50 points to Maryland. I think USC is going to be able to score at will. on Texas, and I think USC's defense is good enough to contain Texas's offense. And really, I think USC is going to run away with this game. It's at the Coliseum as well. I think that's huge for them. If they're playing in Austin in that stadium, I know that's a big time atmosphere. Maybe I could see something different. Maybe I could see it being closer, potential upset or something. I don't think it's going to happen. I think USC is a national title contending team this year. I think that they're going to contend for a playoff spot. They're going to contend to win the Pac-12. They're going to contend for all these special things. I think Texas is trying to rebuild and is hoping to, get to some sort of bowl game, or maybe, be better than terrible. Maybe their goal is to, not lose 5 games this year. They're just in different places. So I think USC is just going to absolutely have their way with Texas.
Shane Buechele, the starting quarterback there at Texas at the beginning of the season after a decent 2016, but they handed things over to true freshman Sam Ehlinger against San Jose State. He performed well. Again, inferior competition there against the Spartans. Chris Warren, pretty exceptional running back, ran for 166 in that game, but talent on the roster, as we mentioned off the top, because they've recruited pretty well. Charlie Strong now, Tom Herman. But it's just a team in disarray at this point. I think Tom Herman's going to clean things up, and better things lie ahead. But I know I checked out some of the Maryland game, and you just saw the typical Texas of recent years of 3 consecutive losing seasons of blown coverages and missed tackles and just mistakes and penalties at the wrong time. So things need to be cleaned up there for Texas, and I would expect USC. I don't know if you can really expect a letdown. It's not a letdown sort of game when you say it's a primetime affair against Texas, but they just did knock off what could be the second best team in the Pac-12. But they'll have to get back up and be ready to go. I don't think they need their A game, but they need a decent effort and can't totally collapse, considering what we saw against Western Michigan, where they were a bit spotty, and it was a tie game about halfway through the 4th quarter. So, Chris, any other thoughts on USC in general, Texas coming up?
I think it's an exciting season now. I think that if you're a USC fan, or if you pay attention to college football on the West Coast, I think USC is the team to watch now. I know a lot of people were predicting that before the year, but the way they handled Stanford, it honestly, I don't think USC's looked that good since 2008. Maybe, potentially a decade. I know they had the big Rose Bowl win. I know they had that year they went, 10-2, finished in the top 5 or whatever. I don't remember them taking a team that I respect the way I respect Stanford, a team that I think is going to potentially be in the top 10, and just absolutely handle them. I don't think the score was even as close as that 42-24. And I think that this could be a potential, very special season for USC. So I didn't feel that way just a game ago, I should say. I thought because of the schedule, they had a chance to go 10-2 and do something special. But I'm looking at this season now, and I really do think that they have a chance to win a national title. And I think that you should definitely be watching and paying attention to USC football if you care about football on the West Coast.
Yeah, combine possibly the best quarterback in college football with an extremely talented roster, with the determination and focus that we saw against Stanford, and it gets pretty serious when talking USC's potential this year. Chris Swanson from Rivals and Trojan Sports joins us to talk USC football with the Stanford win under the belt, the first big one of the season. Texas up ahead of the Coliseum this Saturday. Chris, we appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for having me.